No one in Bisbee dared utter the name Roy Bannon again. To the world outside, he was all spit-shined boots and pressed vests, the epitome of respectability. But behind door and wall, his temper was as deadly as a rattlesnake's sting. More than once, neighbors had heard the cries and bangs emanating from his house late at night, and everybody in town knew the truth. A man willing to hit a woman in public could do a lot worse when he was alone. Once Clara May's mother died, Roy directed all that hatred and nastiness at the young woman. One hot July morning, he pushed a paper in her face, the deed to the final patch of land her real daddy had left her. If she signed, she'd have nothing but the clothes on her back. Her wrist still smarted from the rope he'd wrapped it with, holding her in the chair until she agreed. But when Roy moved away to get a pen, Clara seized her opportunity. She ran. She didn't turn around. The Arizona sun was a hammer above, the heat waves undulating in the air like a creature. Her white dress was in shreds, rope burns still oozing on her wrists and neck. Her knees were streaked with blood. Every step pierced agony through her chest, but fear propelled her on. Hoofbeats receded somewhere behind her. She staggered into an open space, an ancient weathered well standing alone in the expanse. She gripped the wooden edge, scanning the horizon for any glimpse of rescue. That's when she heard it, slow, steady hoofbeats. Along with the dawn came a figure driving a bay horse packed with bales of hay. Elias McGra. Lean, tall, creased by 2 decades of sun, the hat brim casting shade over keen, observant eyes. A former cavalryman during the war between the states, Elias had witnessed the worst humanity had to offer. When his eyes swept over Clara, the rents in the dress, the bruises, the rope marks, he halted, dismounted, approached her silently. Elias didn't ask questions. He just supported her by the arm, his grip firm but gentle. When her knees gave way, he placed her on his horse, speaking softly to soothe the animal under her added weight. The trip to his ranch was in silence. Creaking leather, the plodding beat of hooves, and the rustle of wind through mesquite were the only sounds in the air. Clara's gaze was on the horizon, afraid to look back in case a rider was coming up behind her. Elias's ranch was located along the San Pedro River and was lined with tall cottonwoods to provide shade. It was plain, peaceful, but his eyes were drawn repeatedly to the woods, waiting. The living room inside the ranch was heated by a wood stove. There was only one photograph on the mantel, a young woman holding a newborn. Clara saw it but did not comment. Elias poured her water in the kitchen. She sipped, as if she wasn't certain her throat would cooperate. He produced salve and clean cloth and treated the burns on her wrists, the bruise at her temple, with careful hands. "Soup's on the stove," he stated blandly. "Beef and potatoes. Not much, but it'll keep you on your feet." She nodded, and for the first time in a long time, didn't consider running. She sat at the table, steam rising from the bowl with the smell of beef and onions. Outside, a hawk screamed high above the river, the kind of sound you could build silence around. Then, from the direction of the cottonwoods, came the slow, deliberate thump of hoofbeats. And Elias knew. They weren't his. Clara remained just within the doorway, her palms clasped about the frame. Across the cottonwoods rode a figure on a black gelding, dust wisping at every hoof strike. Even before he drew rein, Elias could discern the line of the man's jaw. Roy Bannon rode tall in the saddle, a clean hat atop his head and a sneer twitching on his lips. "Well now?" Roy swung down from the horse. "Ain't you going to invite a man in when he's come to get what's his?" Elias did not stir. "She's not yours." His tone was as flat as a fence post driven deep. Roy advanced one step, the spurs on his boots clinking in the still yard. "Papers signed. Sheriff will stand by me. She belongs with me." Elias's gaze narrowed just so to indicate he'd caught every word. "Paper is worthless if it's signed with a rope around one's neck. Sheriff Rohr understands the law there." No one said a thing for a moment. A wind shook dry leaves above. Then Roy's grin faltered and something hard appeared in his eyes. "You think you can keep her here?" he said. "I'll be back. And when I am, won't be alone." Roy wasn't interested in fighting alone. Not with the town sheriff already looking for reasons to pin something on him. Elias didn't blink. Then bring a man who can ride fast. Roy's eyes flicked toward Clara and Elias moved forward until Roy had to look up at him. Roy spat on the ground, wheeled around and swung into the saddle. As the black gelding trotted back down the trail, Elias remained motionless until the dust had settled. It was only then that he turned to Clara. "Best eat some food," he said softly. "We've got work ahead of us." In the house, the atmosphere seemed different. Clara breathed more easily, but a knot in her belly assured her Roy's words were not hollow. "If you've been along with this ride, people, you know trouble's just getting started. And if you're a fan of a good Western where a man holds his ground, push that subscribe button so you don't miss what's riding over the next hill." The wind blew up after dark, smelling of dust and mesquite smoke across the yard. Elias had put the horses in the stable and sat at the kitchen table cleaning a rifle older than Clara herself. She ladled soup by the stove. When the dog Outback began to bark, not playful type of bark, either, Elias recognized that sound. It signaled that trouble was coming. Elias laid down the rifle and stepped toward the door. Out beyond the fence, two riders were riding slow. Roy Bannon dismounted his horse first, the same sneer on his face as before, only more pointed now. At his side was a heavy-set man with arms like fence posts and a scar down his cheek. "Evening, McJur," Roy said, his voice traveling across the yard. "Told you'd be back." Elias moved out onto the porch, boots on the groaning boards. "And I told you to ride quick. Guess you didn't pay attention." The big man got there first, coming in hard and quick. Elias sidestepped, took a fistful of the man's coat, and sent him crashing into the earth. The thud resonated through the quiet night. Roy was already pulling out his revolver, but Elias was faster, knocking the barrel aside with a hard hit and burying his shoulder in Roy's chest. The battle was dirty and intense, boots kicking up dirt, fists connecting with flesh, grunting of breath with every punch. The giant returned for more, wildly swinging. One fist struck Elias with a hard impact in the ribs, knocking him off his feet and sending him to one knee. He rolled out of the way just in time, scooping up a handful of dirt and throwing it into the face of the man before leaping back onto his feet. Elias ducked under the blow, caught his arm, and spun until the man yelled in pain. As a move, he pulled the revolver from the hands of Roy and threw it into the darkness. The two men found themselves face down in the ground, with Elias standing over them now grasping the rifle. "Mount up," he said, his voice as smooth as winter. "And tell Sheriff Roar I'm waiting for him in the morning." They tore to their horses, curses dying as they rode into the darkness. Roy knew if he killed a man like Elias on his own porch, every lawman in the county would descend upon him. Clara stepped out onto the porch, eyes large, the lamplight illuminating the worry, and something else relief. Elias glanced at her, then back at the dark road. "They won't quit," he said quietly. "But neither will I." Dawn came soft over the San Pedro Valley, painting the cottonwoods gold. Clara stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee Elias had made for her. For the first time in months, her shoulders weren't knotted with fear. Elias was already in the corral, scanning the fence line. He moved slow, deliberate, like a man who'd come to terms with long days and hard work. When he saw her watching, he tipped his hat. A small thing, but it offered more safety than any locked door ever could. In the days that followed, Clara worked around the ranch. One afternoon, she laughed, and Elias looked up like he hadn't heard that sound in years. One evening, they sat by the fire, the scent of oak smoke wafting through the open window. Elias spoke of his late wife, how she'd loved this land, how she'd believed that kindness was a sort of strength.